Right now, though, let me welcome to our Park Pacific studios here for the very first time in the new digs. I was unaware of this. United States Senator Roy Blunt is here. How are you, Senator?
I'm good to be with you, Mark. After a long time going to that other great facility, I see you got a great view again, and it's good to be here with you in the studio. I think I've been on several times since you moved here, but not in the studio.
You brought a guest with you this afternoon. Who do we have?
I do. We have Charlie Blunt. My son Charlie's with me, and I'm doing some things in St. Louis today, and the last thing we did was a quick, a couple-hour stop at the zoo.
That's always fun.
Things to help the zoo, and so Charlie, who's 8 years old and in the second grade, went to the zoo with me.
Why aren't you in school, Charlie?
I'm at Beauvoir.
And why aren't you in school today?
Well, it's spring break.
Doesn't look like spring out there, though, does it?
Nope.
No, it does not. Did you have fun at the zoo?
Yep.
All right, excellent. Will you stand by while I just talk with your dad for a little while?
Yep.
He's gonna pay attention. A future United States Senator, perhaps in the work. I have to ask you about the statement today from Senator McCaskill on gay marriage. You had a colleague in the Senate last week, Rob Portman, who came out last week, the week before. I'm not anticipating that Roy Blunt's going to have any different opinion on this, but do you have some thoughts?
Well, Rob Portman's been a friend of mine a long time. We served together in the House. We were in the House leadership together. Now we're in the Senate together. And he's just a good guy, and he's a good dad and a good husband, and he's trying to do the right thing in his view. And, people have to make their own decisions on this, and my view has not evolved, I guess. I still believe that the Defense of Marriage Act matters. I still think that the special protections for traditional marriage are important and foundational to who we are. At the same time, if there's a civil contract or lots of things can happen that aren't troublesome to me, but I'm not to the point yet that I'd want to say that all unions are deserving of the traditional protection of marriage.
Some of this ties into what was released a week ago today, this so-called autopsy. I don't know if you like that name. I had Ari Fleischer on last week talking about it. And one of the things that was said in there is for the GOP to appeal to younger voters. We do not have to agree on every issue, but we do need to make sure that young people do not see the party as totally intolerant of alternative points of view. Already there is a generational difference within the conservative movement about the issues involving the treatment of the rights for gays. For many younger voters, these issues are a gateway into whether the party is a place they want to be. Do you agree with that?
I was asked this question not too long ago and said everybody's views are evolving on this. And I said, well, I guess my views just haven't evolved that much yet. I do think that, understanding that health access to someone you're living with, somebody you've decided was going to be your partner in life, if they're sick, or when it comes time to inherit property, other things, I'm not offended by that. I just think that we'd be making a mistake to quickly or to ever, frankly, move away from understanding that the traditional family is still the foundational unit for a society, and for the society to grow, for the society to do the kinds of things that you want it to do. Having special protections for that traditional family unit is not a bad thing. And for one state under the Defense of Marriage Act to be able to say, look, we don't believe that's what we want to have happen in our state, and so the federal government says we don't have to recognize something that another state calls marriage that we don't. That's what the Defense of Marriage Act is all about, and I'm supportive of it, even though the Obama administration has decided, interestingly, that it's not their job to defend the law. There's no question in anybody's mind what that law says. And my view always has been of the executive branch, one of the things they're supposed to do is defend the laws on the books, not defend the laws that they would like to have on the books before the court.
Senator Roy Blunt is here. What about the rest of that report last week? The report that was issued a week ago today by the party. Do you have a chance to dig into that? Do you have any reactions?
Yeah, no, I haven't dug into it deeply. I do think that clearly we need to figure out the way that you communicate in better ways. We need to be sure our message works, and our message right now should be growth and opportunity and private sector jobs. And when you divert from that and start talking about things that people are not as focused on in an election cycle, you're not going to do as well. Doesn't mean those other things may not be important, or there might not be a time in the future when they'd be more important than the economy. But right now, we should have stayed focused on the kinds of things that people want to see solved in the very short term, which is what can we do about more private sector jobs? What can we do that where we don't constantly talk about things that make it hard for job creators to create opportunities for somebody else? And I think we missed the boat by getting diverted into talking too much about other things in the last campaign. Doesn't mean it doesn't change what you believe. To be smart enough to focus on what people are focused on at the time they're trying to make a decision.
Hang tight. We're coming back with more. Senator Roy Blunt is here, and his son Charlie as well, enjoying spring break. What better way to enjoy spring break than coming on the Mark Reardon Show? I think that's probably at the top of every kid's wish list. And we're back in a moment on KMOX. We're back on KMOX. United States Senator Roy Blunt is with me in the studio this afternoon. He's with his son Charlie as well. And we got into a little bit of trouble during the break because Charlie's 8 years old, and I said, I was probably 9 years old when I started messing around with my headphones, and I wanted to be a disc jockey. And then Charlie said, "What's a disc jockey?" And then I said, well, I wanted to play records. And, of course, we got into what are records, right? This is what happens when you have younger children.
Exactly. What are records? What are records?
You mentioned you were at the zoo earlier today. Was that an official visit?
It was. We had a chance to look around at some things at the zoo. And Senator McCaskill and Congressman Clay and I think Congressman Carnahan was involved in this for the last couple of years, have been trying to help the zoo with the Fish and Wildlife people to get a polar bear. They're putting in a new polar bear exhibit. And I'd been promising to come by and had several meetings here today with the mayor, with some people at Volpe Meat Products, and thought, boy, what a great time to come to the zoo, and picked old Charlie up about noon, and he went to the zoo with me, and we had a good time.
Let's talk about the sequester, which is, what was that, 3, maybe even 4 weeks ago? Has there been obviously some of this takes a little time to kick in, but have you heard from constituents? You talk about the meat factory. We were told meat inspectors weren't going to be there anymore, right?
Well, that's right. And I guess they wouldn't have been. I wrote this Secretary of Agriculture and said, are you going to be able to prioritize these workers whose very presence is necessary for other people to work? And he said no. Now, interestingly, Mark, if there was no government, if there was a government shutdown under both President Obama and when we actually had a government shutdown under President Clinton, these were among the employees that were told you have to show up even if there's no money. Now, why would they have to show up? Because 500,000 people in America work in facilities where if the U.S. Department of Agriculture inspector doesn't show up, nothing can happen. The facility can't open. Nobody can do anything. So those people wouldn't get paid. And as the leading Republican on the Senate Ag Appropriations Committee, working with our new chairman of that committee, Senator Pryor from Arkansas, we were able to get an amendment passed, one of the very few that passed, that transferred from money from one category to another, so that now there's money so that the 40,000 people that work in that work in Missouri, 500,000 people in the country, 40,000 in Missouri, all won't miss 11 to 15 days of work between now and the end of October. And the estimate for all of those families, they would have missed $400 million worth of pay would not have been paid to those hardworking families, just simply because a few federal inspectors didn't show up, one per facility didn't show up at their facilities to make that work happen.
Ripple effect on that, right? Domino effect.
Domino effect. And then at the end of the day, you'd have less meat, less poultry, less everything on the store shelves by by October, November, December, meat prices would have gone up, egg prices would have gone up, and fortunately we were able to stop that from happening. It's more of what we need to do. I actually had one other amendment that said any employee that's works, its job is absolutely necessary for health and safety, like the air traffic controller, the food safety inspector, the border control agent. They have to be there. You have to pay them, and you have to prioritize them among the person. If they don't get their filing done that day, that's a bad thing, but eventually they would catch up, and nobody's safety would probably be impacted by that. And I'm still going to work to get that done in this Congress, because I think the Budget Control Act is here to stay for a while.
Well, let's talk about the budget. The Senate, do I have this information actually? Did they pass a budget?
50-49. The Senate passed the first budget in 4 years, and that's a good thing, to actually do what the law requires. And I was pleased to vote for the bill that said if you don't pass a budget, senators don't get paid. I sponsored that in the last Congress, and we didn't get anywhere, but in the first few days of this Congress, we did. And turns out that getting paid apparently was a pretty good motivator, because the Senate, for the first time in 4 years, passed a budget. And I think what we're going to see now is we're also having a much greater chance to actually debate the appropriation bills, try to amend them, talk about our priorities, because suddenly we can't just do everything we want to do. There's a cap on what you can do in law for 10 years, an annual cap on how much you can spend on the discretionary side of the budget. Just like every family, virtually every family I know has a cap, and they have to make choices. Well, this is going to require the federal government to begin to make some choices as well.
But unless we start making choices about the entitlement programs, we're really still going to spiral out of control, isn't that?
That's a very good point. And, this discretionary side of the budget is the 38% of all the spending. So 62% of all the spending is spending the so-called mandatory spending that even if the Congress never met, that money would go out the door until you change the definition of these programs. For everybody who is a certain age and signed up for Social Security check is calculated and paid to them, the Medicaid check, the Medicare check.
Well, listen to this. I don't know if you heard this story. This is related to that. I'll give credit here to NPR. This was an NPR story. I tweeted it earlier by Chana Joffe-Walt. In the past 3 decades, the number of Americans who are on disability has skyrocketed. The rise has come even as medical advances have allowed more people to remain on the job and new laws have banned workplace discrimination. Every month, 14 million people now get a disability check from the government. That's a stunning figure.
That is. And
you should read this article because it's quite fascinating, actually.
Well, it is. And, it's the one thing in Social Security people don't think about, the disability, the workplace insurance part of Social Security, or the survivor benefits of Social Security. And so we're going to have to look at these programs. And if we don't look at them while President Obama is president, they're probably 3 years of looking really hard to find these annual savings in the discretionary part of the budget. But my view would be at the end of that 3 years, the next president absolutely has to turn to the mandatory side, or we'll never get to the end of where we need to be.
You know what? We ran out of time very quickly.
Great to be with you.
Come back and see me soon.
Now that I know where you are.
Charlie, good to see you, buddy.